How quick? I'm fascinated to see sterling gaining traction as we speak on the back of this print. How quickly do you fade any move off this CPI print? Gilts will be opening in 13 minutes.
I don't think you fade it too quickly in terms of that extreme bearish sentiment was in the price. I think pound being higher makes sense. Look, I'm not trying to be rude or snide about the UK, but the fact is the UK trades like an emerging market now. And what I mean by that is that the currency has a negative correlation to its own domestic rates. So when bond markets sell off in the UK, yields go higher, the pound suffers. And that's because it is a small enough economy, and since it withdrew from the EU, it's relying on foreign funding of its deficit. And so it's a currency which it rallies when its yields come lower in this environment. That's not always going to be the case, but right now in a world of rising yields where we're concerned about deficits and debt, the UK is trading like a classic emerging market currency in terms of that. As yields come lower, the currency will do better. So this dovish print that is supportive for gilts makes sense for the pound to rebound. Now, how quickly do you kind of fade this idea? I am worried about the longer term inflation trajectory in the UK. I'm worried about the global trajectory around inflation, and I wouldn't want to get too carried away on this one soft print. So in that regard, yeah, sure, you should probably fade this relatively quickly. On the other side, there's such extreme bearishness in the UK. I'm in the lone camp that actually I think sterling dollar rallies from here. You've got an extremely bullish dollar positioning out there, and extreme UK negativity. Now, I know there's good reasons for both. I'm not saying they're flawed positions, but that means the asymmetric kind of set skew is just massive if there's any disappointment on either side. If Trump does not deliver what's fully priced in on the tariff side, or if anything positive comes through in the UK. So for me, I think actually cable can continue to bounce from here. And in terms of, yeah, you should fade the CPI story, but you shouldn't necessarily fade this cable move.
Well, Mark, you talk about how the UK is at the mercy of global markets. Is it US CPI that gilts really need to brace for?
I mean, at the moment, the dollar is the bigger component of almost every FX story. So yes, to a certain extent here. And I think that, a lot of people are worried about, fiscal concerns. But I want to emphasise that for the UK, what's happened there is it's because of its current account deficit. It's about the fact that it's foreign funding. And in this market at the moment, countries with large current account deficits are vulnerable, especially if there are structural ones like the UK. But yes, completely. To answer your question, Lizzie, US CPI is going to matter. And even though I do think that cable can bounce for it, maybe if you want to play a slightly more constructive sterling view, maybe it's on the crosses rather than better the dollar, because everything is going to come down to US CPI, and then after that it's going to come down to what Trump delivers next week, and that is what is looming over everything at the moment. Given that backdrop, I'm inclined to fade extreme positioning across the board, which makes cable just the pick of the lot in the FX world.
Cable, the pick of the lot. Mark Cudmore, your views on the yen as well, because we've been hearing from the Bank of Japan Governor Ueda speaking, saying that actually, to your point, US policies are now needed to be factored in, as well as those wage increases that he says he's seeing. And you're seeing a move higher in the yen in the session today. Do you lean into that, Mark?
I'm a deep structural yen bear, as you know, Tom, but I am someone who thinks that Ueda really, really wants to hike next week. Now, he cannot promise that hike. We will not get the usual leak to Nikkei saying what they're going to do, I think, until after we get some clarity on the initial stumps by Trump next week. And again, it is the US which really crowds out everything else at the moment. And this is why pricing for next week on the BOJ is a kind of split. I mean, it's slightly leaning more towards a hike at the moment, but you can't have conviction either way. You can't have large positioning either way, which is why it's actually set up to have a major impact, even whether they hike or not, it'll only be a small hike, but it'll have a big impact because positioning cannot be too large on the yen side of the equation until at least Wednesday or Thursday next week. People are going to have to put it on at the last moment. People are going to have to react to the BOJ. And that's why it's an interesting meeting. I think Ueda really, really wants to hike, but he, like everyone else, is going to wait till next Wednesday or Thursday before he really makes up his mind.